if we define IoT, or Internet of Things, it's an emerging concept of a technology and process consisting of highly interconnected physical devices with sensors, communication capabilities, but all pushing information back to some central repository or central server. You look at what these smart devices are. They're refrigerators, they're Fitbits, they're Apple Watches, anything and everything that has a IP address assigned to it. We're starting to see more and more devices, not just the traditional laptops and computers and that sort of thing, smartphones, but more devices that have IP addresses built into them to enable some type of connectivity. So these devices sense changes in their environment and send that data to some type of server to cause a decision to be made or some type of action to be taken. Just some recent estimates that there are currently about 10 billion of these devices worldwide, expected to be somewhere between 28 billion and 50 billion by 2020, which is relatively right around the corner. So lots of these devices are currently out there. There's just a explosive growth of these devices. It's not going away. Generally, if somebody can stick an IP address in it and allow it to communicate with the outside world, they're doing it. And that's what you're seeing with all these IoT devices. So there are a set of technologies and trends that have really enabled this explosive growth within IoT. And most of it is our own doing. The fact that I want to have an interconnected life, I want to have mobile internet, I want to have internet everywhere, I want to have devices that are simple, that do things on my behalf, and allow the computer to make decisions for me as opposed to me having to make decisions for me. So we have nobody to blame here but ourselves for this. But this increasing reliance on mobile internet connectivity has produced an increase of number of devices being connected to the internet, also enabled by the fact that there's a lot more bandwidth available for devices to use, either through data compression or signal processing, or just simple, we've got bigger pipes than we did 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So that combined with cloud storage, anything and everything can connect to the cloud across the internet and push data up there. That's contributed to it. We've got new protocols out there like IPv6 that allow more devices to connect, more devices to be more efficient when they do connect to the internet, and the fact that technology is just getting smaller, lighter, more energy efficient. Put all of that together, and that is why we now have wearable wristwatches that communicate with our smartphones in our pocket, which communicate back to our servers in the house, et cetera, and it just kind of expands from there. So there are a lot of different applications of these Internet of Things devices. The question is, what type of risk do these devices create as a result of their use? Well, let's consider smart homes and buildings first. You have appliances. Your refrigerator might have an IP address in it that notifies your cloud-enabled grocery list that says you're out of milk, buy some. You might think that may be a little innocuous, but consider the fact that lighting systems, alarm systems, environmental control systems like your thermostat, all of those are being internet connected. So it's great that you can pull up your smartphone and see what the temperature is in your house. The question is, does that introduce any type of risk? Wearable smart devices, Google Glasses, the smart devices, smart watches that are out there, clothes with embedded devices in them now, wearable devices. Medical devices, healthcare devices are using internet connection now, so things like pacemakers, insulin pumps, various medical devices are sending data from the device to the doctor so that the doctor can monitor your progress, tell you if you need to do anything differently. But that's all using this IoT concept as well. What kind of risk does that produce? And then in industrial applications, various smart grid technologies or RFID devices that are out there are being used and connect to the internet for communications, monitoring, that sort of thing. I will say that for each of these applications that we've listed up here, you can point to at least one, if not multiple case studies of how somebody has hacked into that. Somebody hacked into my internet-enabled refrigerator. Okay, maybe not a big deal there. But what about my home, thermostat? Okay, so somebody set it to, 80 degrees and then down to 60 degrees. The air conditioner kicked on. And then 2 minutes later, they shut it off and turned it back on again. And so you have this constant cycling of, air conditioners. If I do that across, an entire neighborhood, now I'm going to hit the bottom category there of industrial applications. Now I've got, various smart grid devices that are flipping out because of the load is on, the load is off, the load is on, the load is off. So smart grids are flipping out. Now I've got energy grid problems, all because of my silly thermostat. Are you serious? Anyway, that's kind of a little far-fetched case example there, but there was a study done that looked at specifically smart grid technology going, if we have a bunch of these devices that are constantly cycling on and off, and loads are being introduced to the grid and pulled off and put on and pulled off in rapid session, we are going to have a problem. And it was some very small number. It was something like 100. So if you have 100 of these devices that have been hacked into and somebody's controlling the flow of electricity, that can cause a major impact on the grid. Wow, we've got a significant security risk there. The components that make up this Internet of Things landscape, if you will, there's the device themselves. These are the actual endpoints, be it a printer, a cell phone, your internet toaster, the sensors, the anything, the actual device itself. Then there's the connectivity side of the house. So how are these devices communicating? Well, they're either using radio, near-field communications, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, Zigbee, cellular networks. All of these devices communicate in some way using some type of communication path. And then there's the data that these devices are producing. Where is this data? Well, first, what is the data? And then where is that actually going? And we continually see this feeding this big data problem. So not only do you have all of my personal information stored in some big data warehouse somewhere, and now you've got the data from all of my devices going in and feeding that as well. What could be mined from that data? And then power. So, some of these devices use solar power, kinetic power. Some of these devices are now using wireless power supplies or, resonant magnetic coupling to charge devices. The point behind this list is that any of the attacks against Internet of Things devices can happen in any one of these component areas. So I can attack the device directly. I can attack the connectivity path directly. I can attack the data, or I can go after the power. Either one of these is going to produce some type of effect. Maybe interesting, maybe not. There are definitely security implications of this, with a lot of these devices being GPS enabled and Wi-Fi enabled. Now we've got tracking mechanisms where we can follow somebody based on where their Fitbit is calling back in from. That might allow an attacker to monitor who is where and when. Medical implants, certainly being able to track personal information that's embedded in that device, like who you are and what your medical history is and what medical problem you might have. Plus that all going up to your doctor. Or sensors in the home, again, that that thermostat, being able to detect when people show up from work in the evenings. At 5:15, the temperature in the house starts to increase. before the air conditioner kicks on, well, I know that X number of people are in the house. What I'm waiting for, and I expect it'll probably be 2 or 3 years, but I'm waiting for the presentation at DEF CON, the annual hacker convention every year, where somebody's going to step up to the podium and start talking about all the really cool and interesting things they can derive from a person's lifestyle and how they live their lives when they come home from work. All of this data coming off these devices and be able to develop a profile of who they are and what they do during the day. Like I said, I expect to see that in a few years at DEF CON. That'll be an interesting talk about how you can grab all of this interesting data that's coming off all our devices and figure out who I am and what I do during the day. Another type of security consideration here, a lot of these devices are coming in without security baked in. There's going to be a whole new set of attack vectors coming from this. The idea that most of these devices are interconnected now already. There's this notion of trusted communication paths between the device and the server they're communicating with. That opens the door for attackers to take advantage of that protected channel. And some of these devices have only basic functions and don't have a mechanism for updating or being patched. It's with Heartbleed. When that vulnerability came out, there were stories and news articles about millions of devices can't be patched for the Heartbleed vulnerability. Well, why is that? Because they have no update mechanism. So even if an update was available, they have no way of getting that update and pushing that patch to it. Disruptive attacks or destructive attacks. This type of data that's stored by these devices or transmitted by these devices can get intercepted or altered during transmission. Again, the trusted path between the sensor or the device and the server might be able to be taken advantage of. And once you start doing that with the trusted path, you end up in a situation like Target where you have a trusted connection that's being used for malicious purposes. And so based on that, depending on the environment or what devices are there, we might start seeing some very interesting follow-on attacks to that. It's not just the fact that that device was hacked into, it's what the attacker did once they got through all that. And it's important to note that, go back to the slide with all the 4 components on it. The attacker can target any component in that list. It doesn't just have to be the device itself. And so when you're talking about, let's say, communications, I don't have to have a device. I can emulate the communication and communicate with the server as if I was one of those devices. So lots of different opportunities for attacks here. So what can we do about this? Well, just like anything bright, shiny object, brand new, security will follow, but that's the key. It will follow. Security is not baked into these things right now because it's all about throwing the device out there. We'll figure out security later. I think the basic requirements for security features have to be designed into these devices, built into the products themselves, built into the protocols. Everything that we know about traditional security has to apply here as well. So authentication, the device that I wear on my wrist ought to be able to authenticate to the server that it's communicating with, and vice versa. This device should know that it's talking to an actual server, not somebody impersonating the server. Monitoring, we ought to be able to monitor the security of all these different devices and the data that's coming off of those. That's certainly not universal now, but should be. And then at the most basic level, the data encryption piece has to be there as well. That will solve all the man-in-the-middle attacks and things related to compromising data, integrity of the data as well.